Everyone Saranai, welcome to the last Poya full moon session for 2021. Hope everyone is keeping well, despite the challenging conditions all around the world. But today we come together again to share some time to start the day or continue the day in some cases, contemplating the Buddha's words. So today we're looking at the danger of gain, honor, and praise, lābhasakkārasiloka. So as usual, what we'll cover today is we'll go through our tips and reminders. We'll look at how the Buddha defines the spiritual life. We'll look at what does lābhasakkārasiloka translate as, what does it mean? And then we'll go right into the Buddha's teachings and specifically some similes of the Buddha. They're very helpful and powerful in helping us to understand this Dhamma. Then we'll take a look at Devadatta because he was very obsessed and his ruin and downfall was as a result of some bad conditions for him, one of which was this gain, honor, and praise. And so we want to learn something from his example in terms of what not to do and some of the things that fell in terms of his supporters or followers. And then lastly, we'll look at how we can tackle the dangers in terms of overcoming and training not to breed this gain, honor, and praise. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So as usual, let's start with our tips and reminders. So let's keep an open mind. In many ways, this is about being suvacha, being easy to instruct. When we hear the Buddha's words, it goes in a way that we're eager to listen and to learn and to see where we go wrong and also to learn from it, how to develop our path in a deeper sense. There may be things that we don't understand, but that's okay. There may only be things that are useful to us right now, and maybe later we'll come back to those things and we'll understand them at a later date. We're all learners, we're all trainees, seekers on this path. So we're kind to ourselves in the sense of humbling ourselves to the Buddha's teachings and those of the noble arahants. And in this particular session, we're really focusing on the Buddha's words. So there won't be any meditation as such, but as you listen, really take in the Buddha's words and almost like the emphasis of what he has to say, the grave danger that he's trying to point out to us, and use our own examples. So when you hear some of what the Buddha says, some of what I may bring up in terms of examples, then apply that to yourself and contemplate. And outside of this session as well, take that away and really contemplate how it might apply to you. And then lastly, of course, have good wishes to everyone that helped us to come to today's session, everyone that contributes to this spiritual life, and have good wishes for everyone who is joining today and who is around us in the world who is struggling. So let's begin with the Buddha's words. So the sutta that we're looking at is Brahmacharya Sutta, Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 4, discourse number 25. And really what we are looking at here is the Buddha says, this spiritual life is not lived for the sake of deceiving people and cajoling them, nor the benefit of gain, honor, and praise, nor the benefit of winning in debates, nor with the thought, let the people know me thus. But rather, this spiritual life is lived for the sake of restraint, abandoning, dispassion, and cessation. The Blessed One taught the spiritual life, not based on tradition, culminating in nirvana, lived for the sake of restraint and abandoning. This is the path of the great beings, the path followed by the great seers, those who practice it as taught by the Buddha, acting upon the teacher's guidance, will make an end of suffering. So, the four things that the Buddha says here is we don't walk this path for the sake of deceiving people and almost like pushing them into this path. We don't do it for the benefit of gain, honor, and praise, which is our focus for today's session. We don't do it for the benefit of winning in debates, and we don't do it with the intention, or let people think of me as this spiritual person or person with attainments and things like that. So these things that the Buddha talks about are really about endangering and sabotaging our practice. They effectively obstruct the Noble Eightfold Path, and therefore they obstruct liberation. So in many ways, what the Buddha is encouraging by his words here is that we live this spiritual life for the sake of restraint, abandoning, dispassion, and cessation. So this is the samvara, the pahana, the viraga, and the nirodha. So we do this in many of our meditations. That is part of how we meditate, is to actually increase that part of the spiritual life and to really abandon all these other things. So a similar sutta to this one is the Dutiya Kodagaru Sutta. And the Buddha actually says that the four things that are contrary to true Dhamma is when you value anger, you value derogation, so that's the makkha, you value gain, and you value honor, so labha and sakkara. So that means you're not true to the Dhamma because you're valuing all these other things. So likewise, what's really important when you abandon gain, honor, and praise, lābhasakkārasiloka, it also contributes to valuing sadhamma, true Dhamma. And that's the thing, it's quite easy. We could finish the Dhamma session here by just saying, if we only take Nibbana as the truth, then that's so easy, because we don't value anything else. But it isn't so easy. When we walk this path, we get intoxicated with different things, particularly on the spiritual path and also on the worldly path. The worldly path is full of enticements and things to get intoxicated with. And as you'll see when we go through this session, when you want to be somebody, when you think even on this spiritual path that, oh, I'm so great, like maybe it's secretively or maybe it's overtly. In the case of the example of Devadatta, that was quite overt. If you want to be honored, if you want to be respected and praised, it's really the opposite of this spiritual life, this spiritual path and practice. Because when we go towards Nibbana, it's really the opposite of that. It's about restraint, abandoning, not wanting to be somebody, realizing that there is nobody. These five aggregates subject to clinging is not what we think it is. It's fleeting. It's subject to a whole mass of suffering, and it's not to be taken as me and mine. So that's what the thing is around gain, honor, and praise. If you crave it, you're actually going in the opposite direction. So we'll start with that. Keep that in your mind as we go through. So we start with, what is lābhasakkārasiloka? So when you look at this, it's quite easy to briefly sort of say what it sounds like, and then we'll go into each of the words. So labha, for most people, that sounds like, if you're intoxicated with labha, you think, I'm successful, I'm affluent, I'm wealthy, I've been rewarded with something. Sakkara sounds more like, I'm worthy, worthy of respect, worthy of honor, worthy of prestige. I'm significant, influential. And then praise sounds like, I'm popular. People admire me, for my knowledge or my achievements or attainments. So essentially, when you think about lābhasakkārasiloka at the very, very peak end of it, it sounds like you're special and a bit of a superstar. When you have these things, and you believe that everybody should listen to you and do what you say, and people should respect me, that sort of thing. And in doing so, especially on the spiritual path, what you're saying is almost to the extent, if not in the case of Devadatta, the example, that you're better than Buddha, better than the other arahants. And in some cases, you might even think maybe Buddha was wrong. So there's a danger in all if you believe any of that on the spiritual path. And there's an enormous dukkha from it, because of, we know with the conditions of anicca, these things are not permanent, they're temporary. So even if you gain, whether it's material things, esteem things around honor and praise, then they can come and go. You see that even when you look at the news and you look at and hear about famous people, sometimes they're famous for a time and then they're not. And some people are wealthy for a time and then they're not. So it's a far cry from the Buddha's teaching when you go with gain, honor, and praise. So let's look at each one more closely. Labha translates as gain, but it can also be acquisition, making a profit, having some benefit, some possessions like material possessions. It's a win or a reward or even success. And so we're familiar with labha in the sense of we know it to be linked to abhijja, to coveting, to wanting, and wanting to be rewarded, wanting to benefit from something, wanting to have continuous success. So we're greedy for that. So it's like when you have labha, you're living with greed. So examples could be you want to profit on the share market. You want to get the best deal when you buy something. You want to get the best rewards. You want to win. You want to be successful at work. You want to get the promotion. So there's lots of things in the world that are very much associated with material gain and being successful. And one of the byproducts of that is often keeping up with the Joneses, which is you want to keep up with everybody else. If your neighbors get a particular car, you might get interested in doing the same thing. People travel to certain places. You also want to go to those places as well. It might be subliminal, or you might have taken it in that you actually want to. And those are the kinds of traps that come up with labha. And it can also be associated on the spiritual path with spiritual knowledge, being very knowledgeable about the suttas or about certain things, about even one's development on the spiritual path. Can also be about one's attainments and unique insights. You know, at that point, you forget that Buddha's the one that actually came up with all the insights. The ones that we have are actually behind the Buddha. Buddha had them first. And as seekers, well, no comparison to an arahant and a fully enlightened Buddha, no comparison. So when you always want gain, what it's deeply imbued with is wrong view. As such, labha, just like abhijja, can only lead to dukkha domanassa, to pain and then sadness. So when we speak from labha, we often say, oh, it's good like this, it's good to have it this way, and it's good for me. I can keep it this way, I can make it last. But we know this not to be true, particularly when we meditate. And so labha has a very strong sense of defilement, breeding defilements. So if you remember the Vatupama Sutta, what you start to breed is conceit and arrogance, competition, all the different defilements that come in with it. And in fact, all 16 can get activated when you're imbued with labha. So one of the key things that the Buddha says about labha is that labha is the greatest asaddha, that when you keep seeking gain, this goes against having confidence, conviction towards Buddha. And when you think about saddhas, that spiritual faculties, the one that takes refuge in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and when you're imbued with it, it's almost like all these material things in the world, as well as you could say sākkārasiloka, the honor and praise that you seek from the world, it has this way of making it almost like your focal point rather than nibbana. So what your new religion becomes is gain, profit, money, and then also those esteem needs eventually as well. And so that's why Buddha says it's such an obstacle away from the Noble Path, is because you raise something higher. So what's really important is actually to have more wisdom around these things and also to have the right view and not to be so conceited that even if we do come to some sort of attainment, path and fruit, it's good to know that this is not me and mine, that also, you know, it's not good to be conceited about it and then to become dusila, to actually lose our virtue over it by you know, our speech or our actions or even the way we think. So most of the time, the antidote is always seeing the impermanence, the anicca. And because when we think everything is nicca, then we don't see the samudaya tangama, the arising and passing away of these things that may come to us. They may come to us for certain reasons. It's our parami or the ripening of karma, our good fortune for certain things, but they're still also fleeting. So conceit, if you think about it, is really what obstructs this conviction we have towards the Buddha, and it blocks the wisdom, and therefore what happens is we end up in a bit of a mess. Now, when it comes to sakkara, the honor, we know this as also hospitality, respect, worship, homage, and reverence when people venerate. So when you think about this, it's a lot like esteem needs, that you gain something, but you gain it in a more esteem kind of way. And so there are many conventional roles that are deserving of honor, you know, so our parents, the noble ones, you know, the four pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings, the Buddha. This is something different from what the Buddha talks about as sakkara in terms of a negative thing, an unwholesome thing. It is right to give honor to the noble ones. It's right to give honor to the Buddha. It's right to give honor to our parents. But at the same time, this is more about as trainees, when we're on the receiving end, and the danger of becoming intoxicated when you're praised for doing good things. Now, praise and honor can come to you, and that's a good thing. Even anumodana, when we anumodana someone's good qualities, when we anumodana their generosity, those are very wholesome things. So it's not about that. It's more about when you get swept away and you're coming off the path. And that's something that one needs to be very mindful of, because when that happens, you're really reinforcing a self, and it can be a spiritual self, a self that is very good, is very knowledgeable, has insight. But the danger is that the mind can get corrupted. And so that's what the Buddha is saying to be quite careful about. So there are others who in the world also crave honor and respect. They're like royalty. So royalty, world leaders, business leaders, teachers and professions, other professions that are also held up quite high because of knowledge and experience. But what you see is some of them may be entitled to a certain level of honor, but what happens is they get swept away with it. And that's the most obvious example that you can take. Sometimes you can't see it in yourself, but you can see it in other people, particularly world leaders and everything, when they really, really want so much honor, so much respect, and it's out of proportion. And you can see them getting swept up with, you know, and you can also see them also fall with the dusila, that they become very unvirtuous. They lie, they steal, they're quite corrupt. So that's what you want to shy away from. Now, on the spiritual path, the same thing can happen when you're in Dhamma, that if you're in a position of authority or you're a Dhamma teacher, the same thing, you have to be quite careful with that. It's really for the individual to actually not shake when that comes, because the opposite is also true. If you are honored, you can also be dishonored. So the examples from the suttas are quite interesting, and most of it is actually also in the Anangana Sutra, which is in Majjhima Nikaya number 5. It talks about blemishes. Anangana Sutra is very interesting because the Buddha talks about when you crave the best position. Actually, it's Venerable Sariputta. He says, when you crave the best position, you want to walk at the front. So he's clearly talking about the monks in this scenario, to be given the best seat. Outside of that, it's also the best invitations, to be honored by receiving the meal first, getting the best food, getting the most gifts, being the one invited to speak first, wishing to be honored and respected by your peers, you know, the family and also community and groups. So Venerable Sariputta has quite specific ones in relation to monks, but we can learn a lot from these blemishes, because in some situations, these can be true for us, that we also fall when we demand or we expect. And normally what you feel is the rub when you don't get it. And that's how you see that there is something there to look at. Now, what's really interesting also about that sutta is Venerable Sariputta says, when you have those kinds of what he calls bad, unskillful wishes, these blemishes, then your spiritual companions won't honor you. They won't respect you. They won't revere you. They won't venerate you, because they see your evil wishes. So within Dhamma groups, sometimes this is quite evident when you see certain people demand a lot of respect, more than what is reasonable, or they expect it, and they get angry when they don't respect it, or that they don't receive it, sorry. Then you look at this person and in your mind you think, oh, that's not good. And as a Kalinamitta, you might go up to them and tell them, and they may or may not receive it, because they may be easy to instruct or they may be difficult to instruct. And if they are overwhelmed by gain, honor, and praise, then most often they're not willing to receive it. But it is something that is apparent. So when you see that in somebody else, it's very good to turn that around and see, do I have that as well? Like when I go to certain places, does that also happen in my mind, or am I demanding like that? What you notice is that it can be rolled up again with Kulamacharya and Vanamacharya. So you might have stinginess with families or groups, or stinginess with reputations. You think you deserve something because of your family, the family that you're born into, or you think you deserve something in terms of honor because of your wealth or your reputation and your accomplishments. So you can see defilements breed within this particular thing with the Sakkara. And very much we maybe want to be honored for our attainments, like our insights, what we have to say about Dhamma, how well we meditate, how well we access the jhanas. So Buddha in the Sarcasm Sutta, this is Itivuttaka 81, he says, he has seen beings overwhelmed with minds obsessed with receiving honor, upon the perishing of the body after death, take rebirth in the state of misery, a bad born, a state of ruin, hell. He has seen beings overwhelmed and with minds obsessed by not receiving honor, and by both receiving honor and later not receiving honor. And then again, when you pass away, you're reborn into a state of misery, a bad born, a state of ruin and hell. So the Buddha in that particular sutta encourages to live diligently with concentration undisturbed when both honor is paid and when you receive no honor. And Mahanidesa also says the same thing in relation to the Tuvaka Sutta. The Buddha says, you don't shake with these worldly winds. So we know there are worldly winds, and gain and loss, honor and dishonor, fame and disrepute, pleasure and pain. You don't shake. So whether you receive it or you don't receive it, you don't move. You have more equanimity, really. So that's honor. With praise, siloka, this is really translated, we say praise for this session, but it's also fame. It's also popularity, being reputable, so having good reputation, celebrity, approval, acceptance. The one that really is quite interesting about this one is not the overt praise sometimes, but more so the approval, that we want approval from the world, approval from our parents, approval from our children, approval from our peers. It's such a strong conditioning that when you look at gain, honor, and praise, the world is comprised of a lot of gain, honor, and praise. We're conditioned to seek it actually through our studies, through our work, through our relationships. And so when you look at siloka, what I find quite useful is actually not the overt praise, but sometimes the underlying approval and acceptance that we're always seeking. So again, this is esteem needs, and we may crave a lot of it. And it may not be as overt as wanting to be popular or to be a celebrity, but that can also happen even in a spiritual sense. So this is not, again, the same praise as you would get for doing something kusala. So when we anumodana and share the merit, when we praise someone for wholesome activity, that's a very good thing. We are endorsing the goodness. It's something separate from when you get intoxicated from a sense of self, wanting to get a bigger me, misapprehending the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. So when you seek our praise from others for your deeds, you seek approval, attention, acceptance, you seek it as a measure of your worth. And when you desire to be popular or famous, you want people to know your name, that's something entirely different. That's on the intoxicated, not so good end. So in a worldly sense, you can see, particularly around celebrities, how many followers you have, how many subscribers, how many likes, how many books have you sold, what's your box office if you're a movie star, how many invitations do you receive to parties, whether you're classed as a popular figure or not, household name, those sorts of things. So again, it's rolled up in this Macharya, Vanamacharya in particular, with your reputation. And again, in a spiritual sense, is about if you're known for being someone who reaches the jhanas, someone who can see past lives, someone who has the divine eye or the divine ear, those sorts of things, that it's actually, you can become quite intoxicated. And when we come to look at Devadatta, you'll see he actually became quite intoxicated with a very, very little bit of attainment. And it was only really a worldly attainment. So when it comes to this, it's very much a strong reinforcement of me and mine, of self. And there's a Dhammapada story, it's verse number 81. And there was this Thera called Badhiyathera, and he was known as a dwarf, Lakundaka. And so because he's quite short, and he was staying at Jetavana Monastery. And so the younger bhikkhus would tease him and pull his ear and say jokes to him and pat him on his head. So it was kind of a little bit belittling. And they would joke to him and say, "Uncle, how are you? Are you happy? Are you bored with your life as a bhikkhu?" And all those sorts of things. Now, the wonderful thing about Badhiyathera was he never retaliated in anger. He never abused them. In fact, he didn't shake. His heart never felt any kind of pain or any kind of wanting to get back at those younger monks. And when the Buddha heard about Badhiyathera, what he actually says is an arahant never loses his temper. He has no desire to speak harshly or to think ill of others. He is like a mountain of solid rock. As a solid rock is unshaken, so also an arahant, unperturbed by scorn or even by praise. So when we take this on board, when we are blessed, even for doing quite kusala things, you don't shake like that mountain. And also when you get the scorn or the blame and things like that, you also don't shake. So the quote from that Dhammapada verse is, "As a mountain of rock is unshaken by wind, so also the wise are unperturbed by blame or by praise." So in our case, we often think that we're free of this lābhasakkārasiloka, this gain, honor, and praise, whether it's in relation to the world or whether it's to do with the spiritual path. You know, when we start to develop our minds and we actually do turn away from the world, sometimes we actually think to ourselves, the path is smooth, the path is easeful. Maybe not all the time, but at times, sometimes we do feel, you know, strong and things are going quite effortlessly. And then you get consumed in a very unknowing way, and you think you're free of lābhasakkārasiloka, but it's not true. Because if you really think about our conditioning, we're so conditioned to strive for worldly gains and rewards. And so when we bring that into the spiritual path, it's still there, maybe consciously or unconsciously. We have that worldly conditioning to actually be the best, to succeed on the path, and to keep striving. But the striving is good in a wholesome way until you get intoxicated. And so one example is always that when you have a little attainment, say you are able to reach the fourth jhana continuously, sometimes you can make a big deal out of it. I mean, that's just an example. Some people make a big deal out of the first or second jhana, or they make a big deal about one specific insight that they had in meditation, and then they run with that, and suddenly they're talking about lots of different things and wanting people to give them so much respect and praise. So it's always good to be quite mindful of that, because the Buddha does say that thoughts about gain, honor, and praise are considered unwholesome. So Vitakka Sutta, Itivuttaka says that. And what it does is it prevents us from destroying the fetters. So we would be constantly or continuously fettered to more defilements. I mean, that's what you get when we talk about this gain, honor, and praise. It's fettered to defilements and fettered to wrong view. So it's very important to actually abandon these things, train to abandon these things. And good to know and to investigate examples from our own life where we can fall into the trap of it. And so the key, as we have heard from some of the different words from Buddha, Venerable Sariputta, is really to have more equanimity whether you are praised, but also when you are blamed, or when you receive honor and you are not honored, and when you have gained, but also when you have loss. And I think that's one of the things that you see both sides. And so that's why it's very useful to look at the flip side. So this loss, this dishonor and blame. So we know that the 8 worldly winds, you see they're part of the 8 worldly winds. And you find this in the Pattimaloka Dhamma Sutta. So the Buddha talks at length about the worldly winds. And what's helpful is always to check whether we're overwhelmed or obsessed with this side of it, because quite often we're quick to say, no, particularly on the spiritual path, no, I'm going the other way. I'm not striving for gain anymore. And no, I'm not seeking honor, and I'm not seeking praise or approval and things. That's not me. But if you worry or fear loss, which I think we all do, or we actually experience pain because of loss, then you know that there's something there to look at. Likewise, if you actually suffer when you don't receive honor, or you have fears or worries about not receiving it, then again, there's something to look at there. And the same with being blamed or rejected. We all don't like to be blamed. We don't like to be rejected by people, or for them to disapprove of us. And we often suffer when that happens. And so if that is the case, then it's very good to look at it. Because when there's that rub, then that's when you can see that you can get obsessed with gain and loss, honor and dishonor, praise and blame. So it's good to meditate on that and then not to shake because of it. So you don't shake if you make a gain, nor if you make a loss. You don't shake if you're honored and given respect, nor if you're dishonored and disrespected. And you certainly don't say, do you know who I am, what I've achieved, what I've done? And you don't shake if you're praised or become popular and receive approval. Nor do you shake when you're blamed. You fall into disrepute and people disapprove of you. And this world is actually a very harsh one. When we look at some of the Buddha's words, you'll see why. And then we don't shake whether we experience pain or pleasure. And that's probably one of the hardest things, because we do shake. We shake the minute we lose the pleasure, and we shake when we have to endure pain. And right now is a classic example of that. So it's a very high practice. Like when we talk about gain, honor, and praise, you come into it thinking, oh no, it's okay. But when you think about the fetters, when you think about the ones that are the higher fetters, then you really know this is that part of the practice that you're wanting to overcome. That once you leave all the gross stuff around food, around misapprehending the body, then it's all the rest of it after that is really where we can also fall down. So this is something that we must aspire to really look at this. So what I wanted to turn to now is the Katya Sutra. So we looked briefly at this as part of looking at the Haladikani Sutta. And this was the table that summarizes what the Buddha said about the different classes of people. So you have the ruling class, the Brahmins, the householders, women, thieves, and samanas. And Buddha was talking about what is their wish, what is their quest, what is their determination, so what are they standing on, what is their inclination, the glue that holds them there, and what is their final or end goal. Now, the reason we look at this is because what you find is most of our roles and responsibilities in the world play a huge part in the kinds of wishes and desires that drive our behaviors. And so on one end of the spectrum, which is this end with the ruling class, evidently they're driven by material gain. So they want power and they want full supremacy, and they obtain that through land and other means. So linked to that is they desire a lot of honor and praise. So you think about what we said before about royalty, the elite, the politicians, the people in power, they demand so much of that. They demand the wealth and the land. I mean, most of the wars fought around the world are about land. And they demand so much approval and popularity. So that's one end of the spectrum. Then you turn to, say, for example, householders. So what we stand on is mainly our skill or our trade. So it's our jobs, our businesses that are the glue. So we train and we develop skills, and then what we stand on is our jobs. And you realize that when the most common question that we ask each other is, what's your job? What's your skill? What do you do? That's the most common question we ask ourselves or each other. And when you ask that, you're given respect and praise, particularly by conventional society, if you have a good job, if you've gained a promotion, if you're climbing the career ladder, or your business is successful. And then all the respect and praise comes from that. And so you can spend your whole life measuring up to that, based on the worldly gain, honor, and praise. And so that is what Buddha means by when you go with the stream, you're going with samsara with that, because that's the yardstick. So if you're successful and accomplished and you have a good job, you don't lose it and all those things, then you're seen very, very highly. You're respected. But if you've lost your job, you don't have a job, you have a job that people deem inconsequential, average, then you're judged very harshly, that you're unsuccessful, you're a failure. And that's, again, the same yardstick, the worldly yardstick. Now, for the women, if we just talk about women, not from a work sense, but more from a mother, the role of the mother, then you're measured according to your children. And back in the time of the Buddha, and still in some cultures, you're measured by sons. So you don't want to be defeated by another person in terms of another mother. You want to be have the best son or the best children. And of course, the Buddha's mother would be the one that actually wins that battle, because she has given birth to a Buddha. So all other mothers fail in that sense, in terms of this yardstick of wanting to be without a rival. If you take that measure, then what conventional society measures a mother is how well your kids do. Do they get top marks at school? Are they a prefect? Have they won scholarships, awards? Do they win at sports? Are they married? Do they have children? All those conventional things. And so as a mother, you're rated on that. And so you deem yourself successful if they meet all of that. And the same with grandkids and so on, but particularly with the mother. And in that sense, you could also, from the same yardstick, you could also fall from that, because if your kids are bad, or they haven't achieved the very high success or things like that, then you can be rated quite harshly by that as well. So it's very interesting to see what drives through our roles. And so when you come to the last column, which is samana, then this is the interesting one that is at the opposite end of the spectrum, because when you take up the spiritual path, then you purposely move in the direction away from the world. You're moving so that you undertake the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the way out of all suffering. And so your supports are the restraint, the abandoning, the giving up of the desire for worldly things, and then the cessation of it. And then ultimately, the end goal is Nibbana. And so this is the going against the stream, very much going against the stream. But the problem is that there are still challenges for a samana, that even if you're a samana, there will still be enticements, because the world tries to impinge on the one that is practicing with the end goal of Nibbana. So there will be enticements to draw you out. So lavish gifts, the best seats, decadent food, high praise, fame, popularity, overwhelming things that you didn't have before, maybe. And so it can be quite intoxicating. So in the suttas, you read many, many instances where the Buddha warns monks and nuns in regard to gain, honor, and praise, not to exalt yourself. So not to glorify yourself when you receive all these things, and then think little of other monks or nuns, your peers, and to be very, very cautious. And we'll go through some of the similes of the Buddha that are very, very helpful, because then you understand where the Buddha is coming from. So one of the key things to remember as lay practitioners, or even as monastics, is really that we are very fortunate to learn this Dhamma. So Buddha came first in this. He's the leader of it. We owe everything to the Buddha in terms of learning this Dhamma. And same with the ones that have practiced before us, all the noble arahants. And so if we are foolish enough to claim it, like to claim our insight as standing on its own or to render it and exalt in it, then that's something that would be very insulting to the Buddha. And then, of course, also the noble arahants. So for us, that is what keeps us more honest and on the ground, more humble, because we must train not to become big-headed, even with spiritual attainments or our spiritual practice, not to be arrogant and conceited, because it will block our path. And so when you think about, if you remember the Sappurisa Sutta, that in the Sappurisa Sutta, the Buddha talks about a good person and a bad person. And the bad person, whether you ordain or you don't ordain, you come from the mindset of, I've come from an eminent family, or I've come from a wealthy family, or I'm well known and famous. I'm the one that receives lots of gifts. I am Bahusutta, very learned. I'm an expert in the Vinaya, if you're a monk or a nun, or I'm a Dhamma teacher, or I live in the wilderness, sleeping at the foot of a tree. All these different things that particular sutta talks about. If you get intoxicated with that idea, that notion, then it can be very detrimental to the path. And so it's important not to lose sight of Nibbana as the goal and not to become obsessed with these things that one might acquire or even think of oneself, because you head in the opposite direction. You might delay yourself, you might diverge, or you might completely go off course. And that is why Buddha, I suppose, says that labha is the greatest asaddha. You actually turn away from the Buddha and the Buddha's words. So let's now move on to some of the specific things that the Buddha talks about in terms of lābhasakkārasiloka. So the Buddha has many things to say, and you find it throughout the Sutta Pitaka, but there's an entire chapter in the linked discourses, so in the Samyutta Nikaya, that focuses entirely on gain, honor, and praise. And so we'll start there. We won't cover all of it because there's a lot of suttas, but we'll pick out a few. So as you listen to the Buddha's words, just stay alert and vigilant and heed the warnings. And in your own time, if you can, read that whole chapter, which is chapter 17 of the Samyutta Nikaya. So the first sutta that appears in that chapter is this one, the Daruna Sutta. The Buddha says, "Bhikkhus, dreadful are gain, honor, and praise, bitter, vile, obstructive to achieving the unsurpassed security from bondage. Therefore, you should train yourselves thus. We will abandon the arisen gain, honor, and praise, and we will not let the unarisen gain, honor, and praise persist, obsessing our minds. Thus should you train yourselves." So the words that the Buddha uses in Pali are Daruna or Daruno, and it means dreadful, harsh, severe, terrible, katuko, which means bitter, also severe, pungent, baruso, which is whether harsh or vile, savage, and antaraiko, which means obstructive. So you end up injuring yourself, causing an obstacle. But I guess you see how terrible it can be that when you fall for these things, it can be that on one hand, you could become quite a harsh person because of how much your sense of self gets bloated. But it also can be that the dangers are so severe that one doesn't want to end up in this way. So you can see that it's quite severe because it causes this block. So then we have the simile of the hook. So the Buddha says, suppose a fisherman would cast a baited hook into a deep lake, and a fish on the lookout for food would swallow it. That fish, having swallowed the fisherman's hook, would meet with calamity and disaster, and the fisherman could do with it as he wishes. Fisherman, this is a designation for Mara, the evil one. Baited hook, this is a designation for gain, honor, and praise. So any bhikkhu who relishes and enjoys arisen gain, honor, and praise is called a bhikkhu who has swallowed the baited hook, who's met with calamity and disaster, and the evil one can do with him as he wishes. So this one you can really see that what resonates in this particular simile is that you've fallen for the trap. So you've fallen for the baited hook. And so if it's really bad, then you fall hook, line, and sinker for it. And so that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to swallow this little bit of bait and then go all the way to something quite awful. So this is what the Buddha says. This is the Nagita Sutra. And the Buddha talks about the simile of the dung beetle. And so the Buddha says, suppose there was a beetle, a dung eater, stuffed with dung, full of dung, and in front of her was a large dunghill. Because of this, she would despise the other beetles, thinking, I am a dung eater, stuffed with dung, full of dung, and in front of me is a large dunghill. So too bhikkhus, a bhikkhu's mind is overcome and obsessed by gain, honor, and praise, dresses in the morning and taking bowl and robe enters a village or town for alms. There he would eat as much as he wants. He would be invited for the next day's meal, and his alms food would be plentiful. When he goes back to the monastery, he boasts before a group of bhikkhus. I've eaten as much as I want. I've been invited for tomorrow's meal, and my alms food is plentiful. I am one who gains robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicinal requirements. But these bhikkhus have little merit and influence, and they do not gain robes, alms food, lodgings, and medicinal requisites. And so you can see that that particular monk becomes obsessed, and he basically despises or derogates the well-behaved monks. So it's very severe when it comes to the kamma, the fruit of the kamma of that. That particular one is very strong when you think about atukansaka paravambi, where you raise yourself and you belittle others. And in many ways, what this simile is also helpful to look at is the examples of people that we know. That we see people who do behave like that, who come back from certain places, and they do have this way of being quite bloated in what they have received, whether it's through material things or whether it's through esteem things. And it's good to turn that around, not to shadow box, turn that around and see if you can see that in somebody else, then maybe you either have that or you secretly desire something that they have. And sometimes also what happens is it may be that we feel obliged to boast ourselves, which is not a very good thing. And so it's good to be cautious about that. So atukansaka paravambi, where you raise yourself and belittle others, that's a very strong defilement that's spoken about in the Anumana Sutra. So we're familiar with it. It's very good not to do it. Then we have a couple of suttas where Buddha talks about whom should be struck. One of them, and this is really about the severity of danger. So when you hear the words, it's not that the Buddha wants to endanger anybody, that it doesn't imply that the Buddha desires harm to come to anybody, but it's more the gravity or severity of the disaster, that the danger is very, very real. And so the simile of the thunderbolt, which is this one on the left, is that the Buddha says, whom should a thunderbolt strike, bhikkhus? And then it is a trainee upon whom came honor and praise, while they have not yet reached their mind's ideal. The thunderbolt is the designation for gain, honor, and praise. So the trainee, so the seeker who is intoxicated, overwhelmed by lābhasakkārasiloka, they haven't reached nibbana yet. So that's where thunder would strike, the thunderbolt would strike. It's because you're now in severe danger. And likewise, the one on the right is about the poison dart. Buddha again says, whom should one pierce with a dart smeared with poison? And the Buddha says, well, it's a trainee upon whom came gain, honor, and praise, while they have not yet reached the mind's ideal, which is again nibbana. So the dart is the designation for gain, honor, and praise, that it's very severe. And so it's good to comprehend how dangerous and risky it is, and that if we have even a whiff of inclination towards gain, honor, and praise, it's actually to abandon it, to train to not allow it to arise, and if it's arisen, to fully abandon it. So we come to another simile. This is the simile of the jackal. And the Buddha talks about an old jackal howling when the night was fading. And so he asked the monks whether they heard that old jackal, and the monks had said, yes, Venerable Sir. So then the Buddha says that old jackal is afflicted with a disease called mange. He cannot feel at ease whether he goes into a cave or to the foot of a tree or into the open air. Wherever he goes, stands, sits, or lies down, there he meets with calamity and disaster. So too bhikkhus, a bhikkhu here whose mind is overcome and obsessed by gain, honor, and praise, does not feel at ease whether he goes into an empty hut or to the foot of a tree or into the open air. And that's the same whether he stands, sits, or lies down. He meets with that kind of calamity. So mange is like that skin disease that usually arises when the hairs fall off the body and the entire body becomes fully exposed or broken open. And so when you are struck by the wind, the wounds start to ooze. And it's similar to when you're bitten by a rabid dog. And so you can't settle, you keep running around trying to find a place of safety and you can't find it. So the strongest impression you get from this particular simile is one of sickness, that you're infected with some kind of sickness from gain, honor, and praise. You can't sit still, you can't stand, you can't lie down. And so when you're sick with that, all you think about is that, and you're constantly craving and seeking that as your primary importance. So you can see how it obstructs the path. Other suttas, there's one called the Roga Sutta that actually talks about corrupt wishes in the sense of gain, honor, and praise as a mental sickness. So there's some sort of support for this kind of meaning behind this jackal with mange. So you don't want that kind of mental sickness to take hold, because then you keep thinking about how others view you, what you can get, how you can sustain that reputation, all those kinds of things. So 2 more similes. This second last one is the simile of the gale winds. So this one is where the winds are blowing like gales. And if a bird goes up there, the gale winds fling them about as if it's flung about by the gale winds. Its feet go one way, its wings go another, its head goes still another way, and its body another way. So when one is obsessed with gain, honor, and praise, then the same thing, you know, a bhikkhu would go into the village in the morning with the bowl and the robe, enter for alms, and with body, speech, and mind, they'd be unguarded without setting up mindfulness. They'd be unrestrained, and when they see a woman lightly clad or lightly attired, lust would invade their mind, and they decide to give up the training and return to the lower life. And then others would take his robe, his bowls, and then his sitting cloth, and still others would take his needle case. And so that's just like the bird flung by the gale winds. So in our case, a similar thing may be that we covet or want something that draws us away from the spiritual path. It can happen that we truly want it, or it can happen like an enticement. So it could be a lucrative business opportunity or an investment that would give great financial rewards or security. It could be not wanting to be considered a failure, and so you go towards something in order to do something to prove that you're not a failure. It could be a person or a group wanting to please them, gain their respect. Or it could be the opposite of that, which is not wanting to lose the honor and respect of a person. It could be an activity that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make you famous or to even spread Dhamma. And these sorts of things are quite risky in some ways. You have to think very carefully before you move with these things, because they can be like the gale winds. And if you're not careful, you could completely lose your practice, because what happens is 1 minute you're going along very well, and then the next minute it all falls over because you chose unwisely. So there's something very powerful in this particular sutta, something to contemplate. And then the last simile that we'll go through is the simile of the robe. And the Buddha says, gain, honor, and praise cut through the outer skin, then through the inner skin, flesh, sinews, and bone. Having cut through the bone, they reach right to the marrow. Suppose because a strong man would wrap one's leg with a taut horsehair rope and pull it tight. It would cut through the outer skin, then through the inner skin, flesh, sinews, and bone. Having cut through the bone, they reach right to the marrow. In the same way, gain, honor, and praise cut through the outer skin, then through the rest, all through right to the marrow. So this particular sutta, it really enunciates or draws out that dukkha, that there's pain associated with gain, honor, and praise. What happens is we can't see it because we see the wondrous things of when you receive something, whether it's the material thing or the esteem thing. And you get caught up in that. But as we know with anything associated with a bija, coveting, wanting, you immediately suffer. You experience the dukkha domanassa, the pain and then the sadness. Because each time we fall for it, the rope tightens, it cuts through the skin and goes all the way down to the marrow, depending on how much we are intoxicated by it. So it's important to actually acknowledge it, to see it, and to see that it can flip, that that's the unlasting quality of these things that we go through, that we go towards something that is fleeting, that cannot be sustained. And so that's where we have this rope tightening when it flips. Okay, so now we come to, there's a few suttas that are there, which I'll just summarize. This is in the same chapter 17 of the Samyutta Nikaya. And the Buddha really says that when you're obsessed with gain, honor, and praise, that you're overwhelmed by it, then with the breakup of the body, you come to a bad destination, to hell. So it's something to bear in mind that nothing good comes of gain, honor, and praise when you never abandon it. The other thing is Buddha has lots of different similes where Buddha talks about he knows different people who they would never tell a deliberate lie, even for the sake of a gold bowl filled with powdered silver or a silver bowl filled with powdered gold, or any kind of material reward, or even the most beautiful girl in the land. So there's suttas where he knows that type of person, they would never fall for it. But when their mind has become overwhelmed or imbued with gain, honor, and praise, then they would tell a deliberate lie. And that's really interesting because there's about probably 8 suttas that are talking in this way. And so how we might understand that is in the past, we may have told big or small lies, like even little white lies, because what we say to ourselves is that in order to preserve our reputation or to protect a sense of self or to appear as a good person, we might demean somebody else, or we might say a little lie. You know, we might say we meditated longer than we did, or we achieved something that we didn't fully achieve. And it's really all for the sense of protecting, of gaining something from someone, receiving praise and honor, or it might be to avoid or protect this sense of self, not to be blamed. And so that's how you can understand that. And so what the Buddha says also in this chapter is that when you're imbued with gain, honor, and praise, it never leads to anything wholesome. You actually cut off wholesome roots. You cut off wholesome nature. So all the kusala gets cut off. And when we look at the example of Devadatta, you start to be able to really see that initially, particularly in Dhamma, you don't think it can happen. But, you know, if you look out into the world, there are people that you suspect may have had some of their wholesome roots cut off and their wholesome nature. And the brightness in them starts to fade. They start to not shine the way that they used to when they were walking the path more fully. So the most surprising sutta before we go into looking at Devadatta is this sutta about an arahant. So this is also in chapter 17, and probably this is one of the most surprising things that the Buddha has to say about gain, honor, and praise. And that's with respect to arahants. So what he says is, bhikkhus, gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle, even for a bhikkhu who is an arahant, one with taints destroyed. When this was said, Venerable Ananda asked the Blessed One, why, Venerable Sir, are gain, honor, and praise an obstacle for even for a bhikkhu with taints destroyed? And then the Buddha says, I do not say, Ananda, I do not say that gain, honor, and praise are an obstacle to his unshakable liberation of mind, but I say they are an obstacle to his attainment of those pleasant dwellings in this very life. So this is Ditta Dhammasukha Vihara. Those pleasant dwellings in this very life, which are achieved by one who dwells diligent, ardent, and resolute. So brutal are possessions, honor, and popularity, bitter and harsh, an obstacle to reaching the supreme sanctuary. So you should train like this. We will give up arisen possessions or gain, honor, and popularity, and we won't let them occupy our minds. That's how you should train. So this is the Bhikkhu Sutta. So this particular sutta is interesting because you can see that for arahants, it can be troubling, shameful, disgusting even when it comes to gain, honor, and praise. It's a disturbance to the mind in the sense that you are no longer dwelling in this pleasant mind state. So for us, it's worse than that because we are not arahants, we're sakers. So when you look at that, for us, it's easy for us to become distracted, to spend our time away from the practice, to set aside from frequently practicing to access the jhanas. Because if you think about Ditta Dhamma Sukha Viharana, the Buddha's really talking about these jhanas, that's the happy abode, really. And everything else disturbs the mind, really. You have to bear with a lot of difficult conditions. And so many people ask why arahants, even though they've realized nibbana, why they actually practice different meditations, even though that they've completed the path. And the reason is really this, because the meditations help you to stay vigilant, mindful with clear comprehension. So this is the sati sampajanya. And it's this Ditta Dhamma Sukha Viharana that is makes the rest of the life easeful. So when you remember the Sila Sutta, the Silavanta Sutta, where we looked at aniccato, dukkhato, rogato, gandhato, salato, agato, abadato, parato, palokato, sunyato, and anattato, the 11 characteristics, it said that a stream, one who hasn't entered the stream would practice the meditation, so would a stream enterer, so would a once returner, so would a non-returner, and so would an arahant. That is why it's because you get this Ditta Dhamma Sukha Viharana. And so it's interesting that an arahant could be troubled. It wouldn't mean that they haven't, it's an obstacle to the unshakable liberation of mind. It's just that it's an obstacle to the pleasantness of the mind. So now let's turn ourselves to look at Devadatta, the example of obsession and downfall with gain, honor, and praise. What we learn from his example can be quite beneficial because what he was imbued with through many, many lifetimes was envy towards the Buddha. And he had a very strong sense, when you read the suttas, of being special, that even the little attainment that he had, he thought that he was bigger and better even than the Buddha. And so when you examine Devadatta's example, you realize that it's possible to fall. It's possible to fall for certain things. And so it's very important to keep an open mind and look at the lessons we can learn from it, and to just acknowledge the danger that we don't self-sabotage our practice. We don't fall under the spell of someone in this modern world who is becoming like Devadatta. And also we don't aid good monks and nuns or even other lay people to become like Devadatta as well. If we're good Kalyanamitta, then we help them to abandon gain, honor, and praise, especially if we see them succumbing to it. We give them feedback. And if they're suvacha, they're easy to instruct, then they would say thank you or appreciate at least the opportunity to look at it. You've come up and said it. Now, that's not always easy because usually most people, particularly if they're Dhamma teachers or they're ordained or something of that nature, it's not easy to take feedback. But there are monks and nuns and lay people who are teachers who will take that feedback. And it's a wonderful thing when they are suvacha, because they do want to improve the path. They do want to do those sorts of things. So one of the things that we can do is that we must never underestimate how dangerous it is. So we saw from this, the similes that the Buddha has given, that it is very important that we do not underestimate and to never diminish how dangerous it can be. And realize that when it comes to gain, honor, and praise, one thing that we haven't said is that it is one of the 10 armies of Mara. And so you've heard about the 10 armies of Mara. So we need to be very vigilant and to apply effort, because our army is actually Ara the Virya. It is actually the Samavayama, the Virya. We come up against any of the armies of Mara by actually applying our Virya. And so always remember that's how we overcome anything that is coming from Mara in that way. We actually apply our effort. So when it comes to Devadatta, the main thing to realize is that he had 3 kinds of wickedness. And that is what sent him to the lower realms. And he did particularly grievous, terrible things. So the 3 things that the Buddha talks about is because his mind was obsessed with evil desires, because his mind was obsessed by evil friends, and although there was more that should have been done, he stopped halfway through gaining a trifling attainment of distinction. So these bhikkhus are the 3. Those are the 3 things that led him astray. So one of the things about him, and most of us do know the story, that he was the cousin and brother-in-law of the Buddha. He ordained and he entered the Sangha. And in the early stages, he had some honor. And later on, he became suspected by the other bhikkhus for being, having these evil wishes, and then also having evil friends, and also for being boastful. So here's what the sutras say. There's one particular sutta, the Devadatta Vipatti Sutra. This is in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 8, discourse number 7. Devadatta was overcome and obsessed by 8 bad conditions. So he was overcome by gain, by loss, by fame, by disrepute, by honor, by lack of honor, by evil desires, and by bad friendship. And he would do all sorts of different things. So we know that he tried to kill the Buddha a number of times. He had followers who were also following his bad ways. So examples like Kokalika. He also had Prince Ajatasattu as one of his people that followed him and also helped him to do terrible things. And he demonstrated time and time again how pompous and big-headed he was in terms of when he received expensive cloth to make robes. There are various stories that show that. And in that way, you can see how he was imbued with gain, honor, and praise. And he had these spiritual powers. So this was even, I believe he attained them after the first vasa. But they weren't the iddhipadas, they were just the worldly iddhis, so that worldly sort of powers. And he became intoxicated with having them, and he dazzled Prince Ajatasattu with them, and that's how he got the confidence of Prince Ajatasattu. But the minute that he had the desire or the wish to take over from the Buddha, the order of the Sangha, and that thought alone, apparently he lost those powers. And that was the thing, that he just had such a sort of unwholesome passage. And of course, he tried to cause a schism in the Sangha as well. So we can see that the dusila element, the having evil wishes, having unvirtuous behavior, that's what befalls someone who comes to gain honor and praise, that eventually, out of conceit and arrogance, it leads you to break sila. So things that you wouldn't have done before, you start to do. You might start to lie. You might start to be divisive in your speech. You might start to have misconduct, physical misconduct. You might do all kinds of nefarious things, maybe not as bad as Devadatta, but it's good to know that it can lead you down the dusila path, and that's what one needs to avoid. Now, when it comes to Prince Ajatasattu, one of the sutras that the Buddha talks about is talking about not envying Devadatta. So I'll read this sutta, because what it says is that at the time while dwelling at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary, Now on that occasion, Prince Ajatasattu was going to attend upon Devadatta morning and evening with 500 carts, and an offering of food was conveyed to him in 500 pots. Then a number of bhikkhus approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and reported this matter to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said, "Bhikkhus, do not be envious of Devadatta's gain, honor, and praise. As long as Prince Ajatasattu goes to attend upon Devadatta morning and evening with 500 carts, and an offering of food is conveyed to him in 500 pots, only decline can be expected of Devadatta in regard to wholesome states nor growth. Just as a wild dog becomes even wilder when they sprinkle bile over its nose, so too bhikkhus, so long as Prince Ajatasattu goes to attend upon Devadatta, only decline can be expected of Devadatta in regard to wholesome states, not growth. So dreadful bhikkhus are gain, honor, and praise. Thus should you train yourselves." So this particular one is, actually you can see the influence on Prince Ajatasattu, and likewise you can see the opposite. But what's interesting is what the Buddha says about the fact that all that can be expected is decline. And that's what you can't see when you're imbued with gain, honor, and praise. You can't see the downside, loss, dishonor, blame. And as we know from Devadatta's story, that's what befell him eventually. And same with Prince Ajatasattu, nothing really good came of it because he ended up doing very dusila things. He killed his father, and he helped Devadatta with these nefarious things. And despite having remorse over it and regret and taking refuge in the Buddha, unfortunately, because of such terrible deeds, he came to quite downfall as well. So what the Buddha eventually says about Devadatta in one of the last suttas about in this chapter 17 is, the Buddha says, this was after Devadatta had, was very, very ill and tried to go and see the Buddha, wanted to take refuge in the Buddha, but didn't make it. He didn't get the opportunity to see the Buddha. He got to Jetavana Monastery, and as he was getting out, they had stopped at a pond before going to see the Buddha. They were at Jetavana Monastery. He put his foot on the ground and he started to descend into the earth. And when that happened, luckily he actually did recite a verse that did take refuge in the Buddha. And I think that's the reason why Buddha had ordained him in the first place, knowing that that would happen. But the main thing that the Buddha said to the monks when he addressed them, not long after Devadatta had left, was, just bear with me 1 second. Sorry, I'm back. One of the things that the Buddha said to the monks is, "Bhikkhus, Devadatta's gain, honor, and praise arose to his own downfall and destruction, just as a plantain tree or bamboo or a reed yields fruit to its own downfall and destruction. So Devadatta's gain, honor, and praise arose to his own downfall and destruction. Just as a mule becomes pregnant to its own downfall and destruction, so Devadatta's gain, honor, and praise arose to his own downfall and destruction. So dreadful because our gain, honor, and praise. Thus should you train yourselves." So with this, you really see that part of the problem is really just like, a banana tree, for example. It bears fruit and then it dies. Just like a mule becomes pregnant, again, it comes to its own destruction. So this is the thing about sabotaging oneself, that we need to be very, very cautious about doing such things. Okay, so let's move on. So one of the key things that we come to realize about this is that, and I think we've covered this before, is like elements come together. So if you remember, there's a sutta where the Buddha is talking to the monks and he's saying, see over there, Sariputta's walking back and forth with a number of bhikkhus, and they're all is coming together because of wisdom with Venerable Mahamoggallana, and the bhikkhus that are with him, they're all coming together because of the Iddhipadas, the spiritual powers. With Mahakassapa, it's also about coming together because of ascetic practices. Venerable Anuruddha, it's also about coming together because of the divine eye. And so the same thing with Devadatta, it's about coming together because of evil wishes. And so by the end of that teaching, the Buddha says, it is by way of elements that beings come together and unite. Those of an inferior disposition come together with those of an inferior disposition. Those of a good disposition come together and unite with those of a good disposition. In the past, they do so. In the future, they will do so. And now at the present, they will do so. So for us, what's really important is that we pay attention to who we associate with, and to make sure that from our own perspective, that we don't want to be like Devadatta. We don't want to fall for the same kinds of traps as Devadatta. We don't want to believe in our strong views based on very little attainments and to think that we're better than the Buddha and the Noble Arahants. We don't want to lead anybody else astray to follow the wrong path. We need to be very careful that we don't follow anyone like Devadatta, and not cause our friends or Kalyanamitas or teachers or anyone like that to become overwhelmed or obsessed in that way as well. So it's very important not to sabotage ourselves or anybody else. So to do this practice in a very measured way with more equanimity, and to not shake, as the Buddha would say. So what can we do to tackle the dangers? And the really good thing about this is that there are many things we are already doing. All the meditations that the Buddha teaches us, this Noble Eightfold Path that we are developing, is really what the Buddha is telling us and teaching us in order to overcome, gain honor and praise. So, and of course, there's always more that we can do. And there's some specific things that the Buddha points to. But we are heartened to know that there's many things in our meditation that we do to tackle these dangers. So specifically, what can we do? So it's very good to regularly review oneself for failings, put the mirror up and really look at the achievements as well. With respect to this lābhasakkārasiloka, this gain, honor and praise, really look at ourselves and be honest. Sometimes it's also helpful if you have a trusted Kalyanamitta to talk it through. Sometimes you can consciously say certain things out loud to hear yourself in front of a Kalyanamitta, or you can confess to a Kalyanamitta. It's very helpful, because then what happens is it dissolves. It no longer has the strength that it had, and it can really quicken the development when you work that way with a Kalyanamitta. And even if you don't, if you do it to oneself, or even to declare it to Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and even regret these things, very, very helpful. But it's very important to acknowledge it, because if you don't see it, then you could keep going along nicely thinking everything's okay. The second thing is to make the effort to overcome it. So this is similar to what was said about the army, that our army is really the virya, the arada viryo. What we've learned about arada viryo, samavayama, they're all very, very similar, is that you dwell very energetic towards akusala. When there is akusala, unskillful, unwholesome qualities or behavior, you abandon them, you pahana, you make the concerted effort to do so. And you use what? You use your strength and your power. So this is your conviction towards the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, and whatever from your practice that you have that makes you so confident to overcome any akusala, that's what you use. And you're very firm in your effort. So that means you don't back down. You don't give up. You don't back down. And you don't shirk that responsibility. So that means you attend to it when it's right then and there. And just like an army, when you're given orders, that you cultivate the wholesome and you abandon the unwholesome. And so you don't give in to gain honor and praise, no matter what anyone is offering you. And there is a proactiveness to it. So it's not something where you sit back and allow it to happen. There is a battle going on, and so you really up for that battle. And really, you don't want defilements. You don't want to breed defilements. And what you can see from gain, honor, and praise is that defilements get activated. And we'll look at this in a moment. The other thing is to have a very strong intention. We must never underestimate the power of a strong intention, that I will overcome gain, honor, and praise whenever it arises. So right at this moment, there may not be any of that present. But when it does arise, you really make a strong determination, strong intention. I will not fall for this. I will not sabotage the path. I will not veer off into this different direction. I will not become Vasila. And really the last thing is about practicing the meditations, because as we'll see from the next few slides, that it's the meditations that really strengthen our foundation and really make us see the Dhamma directly. And that's very, very helpful. So there's one particular sutta that is quite lovely. It's the Nagita Sutra. And this was primarily about fame. And the word is yasa. And it's very, you could say it has a little bit of honor and a little bit of praise in it as well. Yasa is very similar to siloka, Sarcasm. And the story appears about 3 times in the Anguttara Nikaya. This particular one comes from chapter 5, discourse number 30. But you also find the same story in chapter 6, discourse number 42, but also chapter 8, discourse number 86. Now, yasa can be translated as fame, glory, success, repute, high position, a great retinue of followers and helpers. So at this particular time, the Buddha was staying in the land of the Kosalans. And he was there with a large sangha of bhikkhus staying in the forest. And the Brahmin householders of Kosala, and in particular, I think the name of the village was Nangala, they heard about the Buddha's good reputation. And on the first night they came and they brought a lot of food offerings. And they stood out near the entrance to the forest where the Buddha was staying, and they were making a big uproar and a big racket. They wanted to offer the food. And at the time, the Buddha's attendant was not Venerable Ananda, but it was Venerable Nagita. And so the Buddha asked Nagita, Venerable Nagita, he said, Nagita, who is making such an uproar and a racket? One would think it was fishermen at a haul of fish. And so Venerable Nagita explains to the Buddha that it's these Brahmin householders of the village, and they brought all these food items and everything. And he was encouraging the Buddha to receive these offerings. The Buddha actually said in this sutta, let me never come upon fame, Nagita, and may fame never catch up with me. One who does not gain at will without trouble or difficulty this bliss of renunciation, bliss of solitude, bliss of peace, bliss of enlightenment, might accept that vile pleasure, that slothful pleasure, the pleasure of gain, honor, and praise. And then he goes through almost like a jnanapada, an insight pathway of what you contemplate. So he says, Nagita, what is eaten, drunk, consumed, and tasted winds up as feces and urine. This is its outcome. And then the second thing he says is, from the change and alteration of things that are dear arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, anguish. This is its outcome. 3, for one devoted to practicing meditation on the mark of unattractiveness, revulsion toward the mark of the beautiful becomes established. This is its outcome. 4, for one who dwells contemplating impermanence in the 6 bases for contact, revulsion toward contact becomes established. This is its outcome. And then the final one is, for one who dwells contemplating arising and vanishing in the 5 aggregates subject to clinging, revulsion towards clinging becomes established. This is its outcome. So these meditations we are familiar with. So the first one is really looking at the food, the repulsiveness of food, that no matter what we eat, it turns back into element, and it turns into the species and urine. So we know that. So we don't overindulge, don't become swept away by these things. So that's also where you don't raise too highly what you might gain of food. The second one is the change and alteration of things that are dear. So this is the manapa aramana, anything that we find dear, agreeable, that they become, they're piya to us, they're dear to us, but we know that they experience vipranama dukkha. They have the painfulness in change. And so what comes of that is sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection or sadness, and despair, anguish. We know that. That's one of our 5 frequent contemplations. The third one is when you practice the meditation on asubha. So when you see that you don't just see everything as subha, you know the truth, you correct the perception in order to see dukkha for what it really is, the noble truth of dukkha. The fourth one is always spoken about the Buddha in relation to gain, honor, and praise, and this is contemplating impermanence. So in this respect, he's talking about the 6 bases for contact, so the 6 sense faculties. And so what you do is you know that they are also unlasting and subject to change, aging, and therefore not to be taken as me and mine is really the end result of contemplating impermanence of those sense bases. And then the last one is the samudaya tangama, the rising and passing away of the 5 aggregate subject of clinging. This is the meditation we do from the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta. So this is how we overcome tanha, the craving, the clinging. So these are the meditations we know, but it's very interesting how the Buddha says he doesn't want any fame, any popularity, any celebrity. And so when we practice, whether we share Dhamma, whether we become very skilled practitioners, it is not something that we aspire to or want. We don't want to be famous. We don't want to be popular. We want to follow the Buddha's example. And this is a very good meditation to do outside of the session, is actually to go through these 5. So the other things that we can look at is really also around Vatupama Sutta. The value of Vatupama Sutta can really be felt and understood when you look at lābhasakkārasiloka, that the danger of gain, honor, and praise is very real. When you do the Vatupama meditation, you're really removing the defilements that start to breed gain, honor, and praise. Because if you think about it, you're removing covetousness and unequal greed. You're removing all the things that make you quite duvacha, ill will, anger, hostility, derogation, disparaging. So these are the things where you don't raise yourself and lower others. Envy, we know that Devadatta, very envious, and therefore a lot of his unwholesome dusila qualities came out because of the fraud, the hypocrisy. I think this one is supposed to be stinginess. And then also all the other things that you're not prepared to listen to anybody else. You compete. You keep increasing the conceit and arrogance. You have vanity about the way you live your life, about the health, about the youth, and then very negligent. So when you do the Vatupama Sutta, it's actually very, very useful, because when you do so, you're actually cleaning it up. You're purifying the mind. So there's no fertile ground to be tempted, to be drawn away from the Noble Eightfold Path. So it's a very good reminder, this meditation. Likewise, also Metta Bhavana, because when we do the Karaniya Metta Bhavana, all these qualities have been also removed. And when you practice the Dasa Kusala, so you want the 10 skillful states through body, speech, and mind, you're also becoming more humble, more gentle, you're becoming more malleable, more easy to instruct. You're removing all the defilements in the same way. And so when you do the Metta Bhavana, it is also helpful. It means there is no fertile ground as well for gain, honor, and praise. And then, of course, we've touched on the Anumana Sutra. So it's been a while since we talked about the Anumana Sutra, but again, you can see that the first one, when you're difficult to instruct, you have these evil wishes. So it's very good to go through this list of 16 and to double check, because when one is subsumed by gain, honor, and praise, you're very difficult to reprove. So number 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, this is about when one is very difficult to take feedback. You get angry, you talk back, you resist, you denigrate, belittle the person that's trying to help you, you prevaricate, you counter approve, and then you just like a brick wall. So these are the things that if you constantly double check, you hold up the mirror, as Venerable Mahamoggallana would say, and you see whether there are any blemishes in your conduct, in your mind, then you know, there is no foundation or fertile ground for gain, honor, and praise to enter. And if someone like Devadatta or the students of Devadatta had looked at this, then it would have been a little easier for them. And really, again, Atthakansaka Paravampi, glorifying oneself and disparaging others. We saw that a lot in some of the suttas we've been through. So when you really look at this particular quality, then again, it's very helpful. And these other ones here are very similar to the Vatupama Sutta. And the last one being where you're not so strong on your own views, that you're more malleable, you pay more attention even to what the Buddha has to say. Even when you share Dhamma, it's really about what the Buddha has to say, not making up your own thing, not mixing copper with the gold, not going off in a different direction. That it's really you actually very reverent to this teaching, because you know that there are others who have benefited. And of course, Buddha himself is the shining example of that. So one can do this as well to make sure that one doesn't fall for gain, honor, and praise. And the one that we've kind of touched on by looking at even the perception of impermanence is coming back to the Silavanta Sutta. So you can meditate on the 11 characteristics, because ultimately where you get to when you start with aniccato, you end up looking at the dukkhato, but then you end up at the very end looking at anattato. And so the short meditation that we do for this is, if it is impermanent, so anicca, there is suffering, so dukkha, subject to change, which becomes this vipranama dukkha, is it worth taking as me and mine? So this is a very powerful, very short meditation, but it really removes that sense of self, taking it the wrong way, picking yourself up. And quite often with gain, honor, and praise, these things are fleeting. They're subject to change. They're actually not me and mine. And so we get quite deluded. This meditation is very helpful on multiple levels. But the more you do this meditation, you don't fall for those things. So the final sutta that we'll look at before we go to questions and answers is the Simile of the Heartwood. It's a beautiful sutta from the Buddha. And what we learn from the Mahasaropama Sutta, this is Majjhima Nikaya number 29. So the greater discourse on the Simile of the Heartwood. And what's interesting is this teaching was given shortly after Devadatta had unsuccessfully tried to kill the Buddha and take control of the Sangha. And he had broken away and tried to establish his own sect and following with himself as the head. The Buddha gave this teaching. And so he spoke to the monks about going forth from home life into homelessness, and considering that you do so because you think, I'm a victim of birth, aging, death, of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. I am a victim of suffering, a prey to suffering. Surely an ending of this whole mass of suffering can be known. And then the Buddha cautions in this particular teaching that if you acquire and become pleased with, certain attainments and benefits of the spiritual life, and then you start to glorify yourself and disparage others. So this is again the Atthakansaka Paravampi. And then that leads to becoming intoxicated with those attainments. Then you grow negligent. So this is the pamada. And then you start to live with suffering. So what you originally went from home life to homeless, which was the purpose of entering the spiritual practice, you end up living with dukkha, more dukkha. And so the Buddha in the teaching, which is quite lovely, is the Simile of the Heartwood, the attainments that he spoke of. So you initially get the gain, honor, and praise, so the lābhasakkārasiloka. He talks of this as the twigs and the leaves. And so you mistake that for the heartwood, but it's not the heartwood, right? So he says, don't mistake that for the heartwood, keep practicing. And so then you practice and you practice and you don't fall for gain, honor, and praise, but then you attain virtue. So you get the sila sampano equivalent. And the Buddha says, well, this is the outer bark. Don't mistake this for the heartwood. And so you practice some more, and so you don't fall for the gain, honor, and praise. You don't fall for simply the attainment of virtue. And so then you attain the samadhi, the concentration. And again, the Buddha says this is the inner bark of the tree, and that's not to be mistaken for the heartwood, because it's still not the heartwood. And so you practice some more. So you don't fall just for the gain, honor, and praise that you receive from the spiritual life. You attain the virtue, but that you realize that's not the end of it. This is not nibbana. You attain the samadhi. This is still not the nibbana. And then you attain knowledge and vision. So this is the jnana dasana. And Buddha says, well, this is the sapwood. It's still not nibbana. It's not the heartwood. So again, you go, you practice, right? So you don't fall. You keep practicing. So you have gain, honor, and praise. You have the attainment of virtue. You have the attainment of samadhi. You have the attainment of knowledge and vision. So jnana dasana. So each attainment and benefit that you receive in this spiritual life, you're pleased with it. Of course you are. And you think each time that you fulfilled the intention, but eventually you realize you keep encouraged by teachers and also by Kalyanamitta to say, you're not there yet. And it's not the end of the whole massive suffering. And so you still keep seeking the heartwood. So eventually the heartwood, as we know from the Buddha and the Noble Arahants, the heartwood is the attainment of perpetual liberation. It's that which is impossible to fall away from the unshakable deliverance of the mind, which is nibbana, the path and fruit of an arahant. And so the Buddha says, to be diligent, to not fall for these lesser benefits, not to glorify oneself or to become negligent because of these benefits, and then to keep seeking and finally finding the heartwood. So he says this at the end of the sutta. So this spiritual life does not have gain, honor, and praise for its benefit, or the attainment of virtue for its benefit, or the attainment of concentration for its benefit, or knowledge and vision for its benefit. But it is this unshakable deliverance of mind that is the goal of this spiritual life, its heartwood and its end. So we can see that gain and honor, it does come, but it's only one thing on this spiritual path, and not to fall for the trap of it. And then there are these other things that we also know we're familiar with, but they're not nibbana. They're still just part of our journey towards the end goal.